Okay, this is Margaret.
Great. Thanks, guys. And then just really fast, Claire, are you sharing the presentation or am I?
I think it's easier if you do because you can switch it and move the slides as you prefer. But if not, just let me know.
Okay, no worries. Just making sure. Here we go. Let's try it and see. Oh, okay. Can you see a presentation? Yes?
Yes,
Excellent.
perfectly.
Fabulous. Okay. So thank you all for joining us today. Sorry for the technical difficulties. We are going to discuss budgeting today, specifically budgeting around grant writing. So how to, make your budgets, explain your grants better, and hopefully get you more funding down the road. My name is Margaret, and I have spent 20 years in nonprofit finance. I have written and managed budgets from $10,000 up to hundreds of millions of dollars. And at the basic level, they're all the same, right? Whether you're budgeting one small organization who has one main program, or you're budgeting a huge corporation that has departments and programs and hundreds and thousands of staff, the idea around the budget is the same. So this presentation kind of walks through a lot of levels. There'll be some things that you probably know and have heard before, and then hopefully some things that you can also learn. I find it's easier to kind of start at the beginning and then build, instead of assuming that you have the same background and knowledge. So apologies if there's some of this that you all already know, because you've been working in nonprofits for a while. So first of all, what is a budget? I mean, this sounds obvious, but really at its core, a budget is a planning tool. A budget is a document that says, these are the things we care about. We're putting our money where we want to invest our resources. So if we put a lot of money in staff and salaries, then we're investing in the programs that require a lot of staff time. If we put a lot of money into travel, we're probably working in the field and going places for our work. So really, at its heart, the budget is an opportunity for you to explain what your priorities are and plan ahead from where you are right now to where you want to be, right? So we are at $10,000 a year. We want to be at 50,000. What are the things we want to do to get there? How do we get there? What are we spending our money on? It is not, and this is what we see a lot, it is not a list of every expense that you have, right? So the number of times I see a budget that lists every single thing that someone wants to spend money on, that's not a budget. That's a list of expenses. A budget, kind of breaks these things out into buckets, but doesn't list every print job, every office supplies, everything that you want to purchase during the course of that year. It's also not something that you are constantly changing. And this is what I fight with folks all the time about this particular issue, because you write a budget in, let's say, December for the next year, and by February, you've updated January with actuals. Now you've changed February and March and April. So we're not constantly changing our budgets, right? Going back to the idea that they are a planning tool, the budget allows us to see where we have planned on going, as opposed to where we are. There are other financial reports that I could spend a whole other session talking about that will explain to you where you are financially and what you're receiving and what you're spending. But the budget is really the tool for looking ahead. So if we're constantly changing it, either to match what has already happened or tweaking it ahead, it's not going to help us plan very well. I will note that there are two instances. Oh, sorry. Sorry. I don't know
That's
what.
making budgets fun.
Exactly. This is why budgets are fun. Woo! Budgets are fun. Of course, it won't do it now. But there are two reasons why I do say you can change a budget during the course of the year. One is if you get a major increase in funding for a new program. So your budget was $10,000. You got a grant for $100,000, right? In June. Obviously, that is huge. And your $10,000 budget for the rest of the year is not going to be the same anymore. At that point, you obviously need to rebudget the rest of the year to incorporate that $100,000 gift. And the reverse is true. You thought you would get $100,000 from this one donor and you budgeted accordingly. And halfway through the year, they've decided they're only giving you $20,000, right? So you may need to rebudget the rest of the year in order to account for the fact that, that's a massive decrease in funding. Those are the two times where I do say, okay, it's fine. We probably need to change our plans, right? At that point, it still is a planning tool. You have to now change your plans and maybe change your priorities because you've gotten more money or you've lost some money during the year. That is substantial. But otherwise, I like to keep them. Otherwise, they're not very good and useful for forecasting and planning down the road. So, All righty. There are different types of budgets. So, we've talked about that they're at their heart, they're all planning tools, but there are different things you can plan, right? So if you're looking at your organization as a whole, then you might have an organizational budget. You guys are all grant writers, and you know that oftentimes your funder wants a budget just for the program that they are looking to fund, right? So one example I give for an organization I've worked a lot with, because it's very simple to understand, they provide a lot of mission services to individuals experiencing poverty and homelessness, right? They have a lot of programs. They have a food pantry. They have a hypothermia shelter. They do emergency support services. They do a lot of case management and counseling. Plus, they just have the organizational day-to-day work of running the organization. All of those programs have their own budgets, right? So we're looking at the food pantry and we're saying, we know that these grants come in every year for the food pantry. That's our income. We also know that to run it, we need to pay for certain things. We have a manager, we have an assistant manager. Sometimes we have to buy food because we don't get it all donated. We have to pay for utilities, for refrigeration and freezers of the produce and the meats and the dairy. We have to pay for shelving, perhaps some transportation. All of these are items that we need to run the program, right? If the organization did nothing and they did away with this program, we wouldn't need to pay for those things anymore, right? So when you're thinking about developing your program budgets, what are the expenses related to managing that program, right? If you didn't run the program anymore, these are the things you wouldn't need to pay for anymore, right? This could be the whole year, or if you're writing a grant, it might be for a period of a year or multiple years. A grant may just be for 6 months. So the grant, the budget you use for that grant is just 6 months of that program budget. So I think that's one piece to think about in writing the program budgets, is they are specific to the work that you're doing and they're very siloed, right? On the flip side, you have the larger organizational budget. The one easy way to think about this, honestly, is take all of your program budgets and smush them together. And I apologize for having to translate the word smush. Merge, aggregate, combine, smush them together to start your organizational budget. So this is the budget you're going to probably create towards the end of the year for the next fiscal year. And it's going to be all of the program stuff you work on, plus all of those things that you need to have to just run the organization, right? So if you ran 0 programs, if you just were a building or you were just a website or you just, existed without doing anything, what are the expenses that you would have to incur? And that might be administrative salaries, website, like I said, if you have a website presence, if you have rent for a building where you're working, perhaps some insurance or other just general office expenses that you have to keep up in order to maintain working legally. All of those things are part of your organizational budget. So you can think of it as, your organizational budget is all of the program stuff smooshed together, plus all of those other expenses that you have to pay for just to keep the doors open, whether you're running a program or not. So those are the two that usually come up when you're writing grants. So often when you go to submit a grant, they will ask for you to attach an organizational budget. And when they do that, they're asking for this larger budget that includes everything that your organization does for that year, right? Another grant may ask for a program budget, and that is going to be just for the one program that you're asking that grant to cover. So in the earlier example, if I'm applying for a grant to cover the food pantry for that one organization, and they want a program budget, I'm going to just give them the budget for the food pantry. That includes those things that we talked about, right? So what's next? Oh my goodness. Oh, I'm so excited to see what's next. Ooh, how to build a budget. So we talked about what a budget is. It's our planning tool, right? It explains what we're going to do with our money during the year. And then there are different types of budgets. And so we talked about what are the different things you might be asked to come up with. But how do we actually build them, right? So you might have in your head, okay, I get it. I'm supposed to have a budget for the programs I run and for the organization. But how do I, oops, did it go away? Yeah. Oh, there we go. Sorry, my screen changed and all of a sudden the presentation went away. So when you're thinking about starting those, you might where do I start to even build any of those budgets, whether they're organizational or programmatic or just, to get me through the day budgets. And I think the place I like to start is without any numbers. I understand that numbers are scary and sometimes can be intimidating and you don't know where to start. So the way that I always like to think about it is actually starting with, what am I just doing, right? Just sit down with a piece of paper or a computer and not even thinking about how much anything costs. Just map out for your organization for the year, what am I going to do? Right? So I'm sitting down for that same organization I talked about, and I've decided this year I'm going to run all of those programs I talked about, the pantry, the hypothermia, the emergency support services, case management. But you know what? This year I want to add a program, right? So I'm going to map out what all of those look like and have that in my head. This is what I want to do during the year. No numbers, just what do I want to do with my organization during this year? Okay. You know which ones you're working on. Are you starting a new one? So I think this year I want to start, it's election season over here in the US. I want to start a voter registration program for the year. Great. Okay. That's going to be a new program that I'm going to adopt for this year. Do I want to expand any of the other ones? I think I'm good. The other ones are doing really well. Do I want to stop any this year or cut back? Maybe. I think I'm good though. I'm going to create the one new one, but the other ones are going to stay the same. Right? Again, still no numbers, just mapping out what do I think I want to do this year. And then again, because I'm a very visual person, so I literally do this on a piece of paper month by month. And I say, okay, in January, these are the activities I think I'm going to do. I know where I want to get by the end of the year. Here are the actual activities that I need to do this year to make this program work, right? Still, no numbers, just my activities during the year so that I can see what I might need money to do. And then once you have all of that and you've really thought through what you're doing, then you can start with numbers. I think this is actually a little bit easier than trying to jump right into a giant spreadsheet and put numbers everywhere that can, change because you haven't thought through all the other stuff yet. I really like to map out what I'm doing first, because then the numbers just get plugged in, right? If I know that I need to hire a new person in March in order to start this voter registration program, then, oh, sorry, I'm getting all kinds of fun symbols today. Sorry about that. So if I know I need to hire someone, then when I'm starting to actually develop that budget, then when I'm going through the months, I know, okay, in March, I need to budget for that new person I need to hire for that program I want to run, right? So when we're thinking about it, we know what we want to do. We have it mapped out, sometimes by month, if that's easier for you. And then we're going to actually start putting numbers to all of those activities. In order to do this activity, I'm going to need one new staff that will cost this much. In order to do this activity, I'm going to need to pay for 2 people to go to a conference. To do this activity, I need to purchase, this type of office supplies and maybe 2 new laptops, So thinking through what are the things I need to buy in order to make those programs happen, right? And then once you've gone through all of that, you can put it in a spreadsheet. I know everyone just jumps to Excel and wants to write up a budget from day one. I like to go through this whole process. And then finally, once I've mapped out what I'm doing, how much it's going to cost, I then go to my spreadsheet and I actually put it in any number of budget templates you could see, including the income at the top and then the expenses at the bottom. And I usually do start with the expenses. What do I need in order to make all this work, right? Because I know this is how much money I need to do all of this work. And then I go up to the income and say, what income do I know is coming in this year? Do I have grants that are secured? Do I have donors that I know are going to be giving me certain amounts? If not, how much do I need to raise during the year to make all of this happen? And then I can start to go through and kind of nitpick and okay, well, I don't know that I can actually raise that much money to do all of these things. So what are my priorities? What is my base budget? What are the things I would like to do? Maybe I can't afford to do that voter registration project this year. It would be great, but I just don't think I can raise the money to do it. So we might need to get rid of that. But I start with the programs. I start with the ideas. And then I go from idea to activity to cost, and then I develop that actual formula of a budget that you keep seeing everywhere. I hope that kind of makes sense, because that's how my head works. And I'm a very visual person. I like to map things out, and I will literally start drawing on a piece of paper all the things I want to do and how much they cost. So if you do that and you don't go straight to a spreadsheet, that is totally fine. And I think your budget will probably more accurately represent your work than if you just jump into trying to put numbers in a spreadsheet. And then if they accurately represent your work, then they will better match your grant narrative So, we talked about writing budgets for grants. This is really where that comes into play, because you have this beautiful budget that you've written and you know what you need to raise and what you want to spend money on. And now you're taking the time to write the grant. And you've typed up all of the answers. They've asked you what your project description is. You've talked about your partners and sustainability and all of the different goals and outcomes that you hope to achieve. You're very excited about your program and the potential for this funder to give you money to go after your program, right? Before you submit anything, do a double check to make sure that your narrative, so what you say you're going to do in your program, matches what you say you're going to spend money on in your budget. So this is a classic issue that we see, is that you have amazing descriptions of what you're going to do, and then you get to the budget, and the budget doesn't talk about any of the things you've talked about in your description. In your description, I've talked about feeding all of these people and running a shelter and, just working with people day to day. My budget only lists the salaries of 2 people and some rent and maybe some office supplies. There's no talk about food. There's no talk about shelter. There's no talk about, a case manager. None of those things are in my budget. So one thing I always like to do is to make sure that if I am talking about it in my project, that it's somewhere on my budget sheet as well. Now, sometimes your funder will actually make this easier for you because they give you a template that will force you to talk about these things in your budget. So one thing I do want to do is kind of get out of the formal presentation thing and share some samples. So just bear with me as I try to, let's see, share a few things on my screen. All right. So I talked about making sure that everything matches between your project narrative and your budget. One sample that has done this really well, and we have permission to share their information. They are a great partner with Unfunded List, someone who has submitted to Unfunded List many times. It's an organization here in DC that applied last year. And when you're reading through their project narrative, they talk a lot about wanting to provide vaccines for individuals who come to their clinics, right? This particular grant is for $25,000. And in the project description, so this is the part where they're talking about what are we doing and why is it important? HIV or HPV is a condition. We want to make sure people are vaccinated. People don't always have access to vaccines, especially in certain areas of Washington, D.C. So we want to use your $25,000 to vaccinate 102 participants, right? So in the description where they're talking about the why and the how and the goals and all of these things, they are very explicit to say vaccines for 102 people for a cost of $245 per dose. Right in there. So I know immediately how they're going to spend that $25,000. I don't even have to look at a budget. I know by reading the project description how they're going to spend the $25,000. And it matches to exactly the project they want to run. They want to run a project to vaccinate people. And they talk right in there how much it'll cost to do that, right? This is a really great example of how people have been able to get budget information into the non-budget section of the grant. One of the things we see a lot at Unfunded List is that the funder doesn't actually require that the submission have a budget with it, right? That's become very popular these days, is that you don't actually have to submit a formal budget, which is fine. But that still leaves the funder with a lot of questions about how you're going to spend my money. If I'm going to give you $25,000, even if I don't want a formal budget, I would like some idea of how you're going to spend the money. And this is one way that I've often suggested for people to get budget numbers into the description, even if it's not required as a formal budget. So when you're writing, up what you want to do, I want to provide vaccines, or I want to have a food pantry. And to run that food pantry, I would need to hire one person to manage it at about $60,000 a year. Also, we'll have to pay for some food. On average, the cost would be $100 per family per month for 300 families a month. Just some of those numbers that would be helpful in a budget. If you can slide them into your project description, it will actually help your funder understand better where their money is going, even if they don't require a budget. So that's something that we see a lot, actually, is funders don't require a budget, but they still, at the end of the day, want to know where the money's going. So any way that you can slide it in would be ideal. For those that do require budgets, some of them actually give you budget templates to use. I have two samples. Well, actually, first of all, before you get into that, a sample of a budget narrative that was the opposite of this, that actually did not do an ideal job. This was another organization that we've reviewed. And, at the end of the day, they were doing a lot of good work. They were, I'm not sharing details about their organization. They have not given us permission to do so. So that's why I'm being slightly more vague. But, when they were doing their budget, they had to explain what they wanted to spend the money on. Of a $10,000 budget request, $2,750 was going to materials and supplies. Maybe. Number one, they don't explain what materials and supplies are. I have no idea what materials and or supplies they want to use. They do a little bit better where they talk about printing, except they only include $2,100 for printing and project materials. So, again, when you're going through and you're trying to make sure that your budget matches what you say you're going to do, at no point in time do I know what they're spending money on for printing. Why are you printing things? Is that furthering the project? I don't know. And not only that, but the numbers aren't the same. So is there another $650 somewhere? Is there another $650 somewhere that, I should be looking?
It's amazing declare that tuende.
Please, everyone, remember to mute yourselves. I'm going to, 1 second, Margaret, sorry.
No, you're fine.
You can continue. I'm going to try to find the person.
You're totally fine. I just want to make sure there wasn't like a question that someone had right then. I had questions when I saw this, so I mean, but this was, again, where Mary Center was so concise. They had exactly how many and what it costs and why. This one, as you can imagine, leaves you with a lot of questions. It's a generic idea. I want to do some printing, but I don't know what. And not only that, but I have two different numbers of what I want to spend on printing. So again, just a reminder that when you are submitting these, to go through and make sure that you're explaining what you want to spend the money on, and also just double check your numbers that they actually match, so that you're not leaving someone out there. There we go. Guess if there's something missing somewhere. We talked a little bit about funders that may have budget templates that are required. I do have two samples to show of that. When you're submitting a grant, again, there may be a lot of grants that don't require budgets these days, and that's where you kind of want to slide it into your project description. But several of them still do require that you submit a budget, not only a budget, but a budget in their very specific template. So I have two examples, and one is a like much more advanced sample, and then one is kind of more of a traditional sample that you might see other places. So let's see, where's the 2 seconds? Oh, there it is. Alrighty. Oh, where did it go? There we go. Sorry, I got a whole bunch of things on Zoom just now that like threw me off. Alrighty. So when we talked about samples from various funders, this is kind of a very basic budget and budget narrative sample that a lot of funders will use. And this is one funder that we just found online. But the idea is very standard. They want to know personnel, and they give you a section to explain the total. And then they want to know specifically how much to each type of personnel, what are they doing, where did you get that number? So these are the sections that they require in their very specific budget template. When you're writing your own budget, so remember we have our budget that we created from our ideas and our activities and then our expenses. You might have different categories than this, right? So you may not have any contractors. You may have a lot of materials and supplies, but you may not call them materials and supplies. You may have, you may have some of these things and not call them travel or training. But unfortunately, this funder likes to call them travel, training and events, equipment. So you have to take the budget that you've written from your ideas and activities and make it fit into this template. So that's one thing when you're looking at a grant, to make sure that you're taking the ideas that you have, but sometimes you have to force them to fit into the template that the funder is requiring. And then on the flip side, if you are given the grant, if you're awarded the money at the end, they will usually want you to then report back to them in this same format. So making sure that you internally have a way of using the budget that you created and translating it into the format that the funder wants. And just kind of planning ahead for that in your mind when you're actually doing the reporting out to the funder. But this is a pretty standard, very simple budget template. It has all the main categories. They want to know the totals, and then they have a space for you to explain exactly where that total came from. Again, I think that's one thing to remember, is just double checking that you have a reason behind everything. If you say that a total is, $50,000, where did that come from? That you didn't just make up that you need that much, but it means we need this person for this number of hours at this rate per hour, or something along those lines. And then finally, the advanced version. So you've gotten, to a big grant and you're like, oh my gosh, I have spent 3 months writing this program description and it's beautiful. And then you get to the budget section and they give you this template. And this template is overwhelming. This template is big. It has a lot of tabs on it. It's a lot, right? But something to think about is that this is a budget template that a foundation uses. So if you are looking at applying to some of the larger foundations or to governments, you may come across templates like this. And I just want you to not freak out. Don't be scared of them, because number one, you probably can't break it, right? It's a spreadsheet. It's not, you can't actually harm it or injure anyone with it. And usually they're pretty good about including instructions. So my advice is always to just go one step at a time and get bogged down. Don't, get overwhelmed by all of the tabs, because as you start to read through the instructions, it's very possible that you don't actually need to fill all of that out. it's usually something where you actually only need to fill out part of it, or as you start to fill part of it out, it actually fills in the rest of it for you. So, it's one of those things, just take it one step at a time. And remember that if you only have 3 things on your budget, then you only need to fill out 3 things here. There's no need to fill out every piece of a budget if it doesn't match what you're doing. But I think it's important to see that there are different budgets for different types of funders. Some of them are very simple, like that other one we just looked at, and some of them can get very complex. But at the end of the day, they are the same thing. The funder is just asking you, we want to give you money. How are you going to spend our money if we give it to you? Right? That's all they want to know. They just want to know that you have a plan, and that if they give you money, that you will use it wisely, and in a way that will further your programs, right? So whether it's simple or very complicated, they're all asking the same thing. And you already know the answer because you've already written your budget. You shouldn't have to create things for these because you've already written it. This is just taking the information that you have and maybe putting it in different places in a new budget. So I do have a couple, let's see, just notes as we are wrapping up here. As we talked about, a budget is a planning tool. So think of it as that, right? It is something to help you plan your activities, your growth, your income for the year, where you need to look for funding, what you need to spend money on. It's to help you run your organization and your program better. There are 2 main types. There's your big organizational budget that includes everything that you could possibly do. And then there are the programmatic ones, which are silos. They're little buckets for each of the projects that you're working on. And sometimes if you're a small organization, they might be the same, and that's okay. When you're writing your budget, I like to start with my ideas of what I want to do instead of jumping into spreadsheets like that last one I showed you, which are just too much to start with. So start off with your ideas. What am I doing? What do I need to purchase or buy, or who do I need to hire to make that project happen? And then build your budget out from there. And then finally, when I'm looking at my grants and I'm actually writing them out, just double check that I actually match my project description matches my budget description. I'm not talking about giving out food in my project description and then talking about housing in my budget. Make sure they match. And then also make sure that your numbers match across the whole grant. That one for vaccines, if we talk about them costing $245 in the project description, our budget needs to make sure that they are $245 each. You guys saw that example I gave where they had 2 different numbers for materials and supplies. A very quick review of your grant would have pointed out that you have 2 different numbers there. And for a funder, I'm going to look at that and say, they didn't double check this. I don't know what that means, but they might get pushed down a little bit because they're not reviewing their work. So just quadruple check that the numbers are the same across the whole grant and the budget, and that they all add up, right? So if I do have 2 different things in a budget line that make up that number, or if I have like the vaccines, I say 102 vaccines at $245 each, I should be able to do the math, and that should match what I'm asking for, right? So I don't want to submit a budget that has a math in it that says I'm getting 100 vaccines at $200 each, which is only $20,000, but I'm asking you for 25. Well, what am I going to do with the other 25, right? Or the other 5,000? So just double check your math and that the numbers are the same everywhere. So I know that's a lot, and I probably went a little fast because we were a little behind, and I wanted to make sure that you guys ended as close to time as possible, because I'm sure you're all very busy and have a lot of things to get to. So I don't know if we are doing questions or anything, or you know, that.
We have many messages on the chat. They are mostly compliments for you.
Oh, thank you.
I'm going to send them all to you after the meeting. Thank you, everyone. First
Yeah.
for the patience, and then for being so supportive and excited about this session. And thank you, Margaret. We do have one question in the Q&A that says, this is a very technical area where we mostly goof in grant application. Thank you for the training. Now, is there a standard percentage of how much goes to personal expenses? Suppose the donor says they will give you 20,000, how much percentage should go to personal?
That's a great question. And there isn't a standard, right? So there's no right or wrong. I always ask organizations to justify anything that they want to get in a grant. So if they, if you're asking for 10,000, or was it $10,000, 20,000, and if you want to put all of it towards salaries, then justify why to me. Right. So if you tell me that if it's $20,000 grant and I want to spend all of it on salaries, then tell me why. Is it because you are a service-based organization and 90% of all of your expenses are salaries, that you don't really have overhead, you don't have rent, you don't have any of those other things, you are just salaries, which a lot of organizations are? Then tell me that. Like, we need all of it to go to salaries because that is our only real expense, right? So I think whatever you ask for, whether it is 20% or 100%, the biggest thing is to justify what or you're choosing. And again, back it up with, we want to include 20,000 for salaries. That means 10,000 for our executive director, whose salary is X, and this covers Y percentage of their salary for the year. So again, just backing up whatever you choose to ask for with a Y and where you got the number.
We have two more questions, one from Patricia and Aroma. You have, yes, can you unmute yourself?
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Patrick Aroma from Uganda. My question is, if the organizational annual budget is say like 50,000 US dollars, but now you have a grant proposal within the same year, and say you are applying for that grant 300,000 US dollars, but your annual budget is talking of 50,000 US dollars. Are there implications?
Yes. Yes. So I have seen it happen. I have worked with organizations that have been around 50,000 or so, and they have received budgets that were 2 and 3 and sometimes 4 times their annual budget, right? I honestly don't know if you're not a US-based organization, if it's the same thing. For the US-based organizations and with US funders, it would be an issue because of a thing we call the public support test. Feel free to see another unfunded list presentation I give about the public support test. Because in the US, we do have a rule where a singular funder can't be more than a certain percentage of your annual budget. So if you are in the US and it was a US funder, that might be a red flag, because they would obviously be more than that percentage of your annual budget. That being said, oftentimes that might be a multi-year grant. So maybe it's 300,000 over 3 years.
Yes.
Would be
300,000
spread it
3 years.
out. Right. So I honestly am not sure if you're not based in the US, what the
No,
legal.
I'm based in Uganda.
Okay. Yeah. So I honestly am not sure in Uganda what the legal implications would be for that. I have seen it happen, and I think the biggest issue is ensuring that you have the infrastructure to manage that grant if you get it, because you probably have infrastructure to manage 50,000, but do you have all of the systems to process and manage 300,000? So,
Thank you.
good job. Congrats if you did that.
Thank you, Patrick. Now, there's another question from Patricia. Patricia that says, "Good morning. What software do you recommend for building budgets for nonprofits?"
Okay. Sorry, you broke out there in my internet just for a second. Can you repeat the question?
Oh, of course. What software do you recommend for building budgets for nonprofits?
Sure, software. So I honestly just use Excel, right? So Microsoft Excel products. You can also, you can use pen and paper if you want to, like that also works if you have a calculator. But most of mine, I actually just do in Excel. If you do have access to like an accounting software, I use QuickBooks a lot. And they do have a feature where you can build the budget in QuickBooks and then run reports during the year to kind of see where you are. So your budget versus actual report, which, makes it very easy to do. You can do the same thing in Excel workbooks with your bank statements and kind of do it a little bit more by hand if you don't either want to pay for or have access to QuickBooks online. But that's the easiest one because it's very user-friendly. There are a ton of other softwares. They do get a little bit more expensive and a little bit more complex in terms of having to understand a lot of more accounting, but Excel and QuickBooks are kind of the easiest.
Okay. Anyone else that has a question? You can write it on the chat or raise your hand. I think that would be it. For everyone, I just
Sorry,
shared
I
this
have a
on
question.
Oh, okay.
Hi.
Hi.
Sorry. I had put my question in the question and answer box, but I'm sure you didn't see it. Hello.
Hello. I didn't understand.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Okay, so I put my question in the question and answer box, but I guess you didn't see it.
Sorry.
So should I go ahead?
Oh yeah, I can see it now. Sorry. It says, as an organization that subgrants, how do you input your salaries and that of your subgrantee? Should your subgrantee cost be part of the program cost?
Oh, okay. So you as an organization subgrant to other organizations, right? So the easiest way to do it, and what I've actually seen on most other grant applications that I've seen, is if there are, see, budgets are exciting. This is how excited I get about them. You're lucky. I told Clara earlier, you're lucky I'm not doing the budget song and making everyone think the budget song for you. Maybe next time. So the easiest way to do it, and the way that even most federal funders in the US like to see it, is if you are subgranting to another organization, that is just one line on your budget. So if Unfunded List is subgranting to Kujalink, then the budget line item is just Kujalink. And then whatever they do with it, like they have submitted a budget to us, we've approved it, we're good with how they're spending the money. And that may be like a little miniature side budget for that program. But in terms of our organizational budget, it is just a line item for Kujilink for the grant that we're giving them. So like we don't usually break out, if the $10,000 we give to Kujilink is for salaries and tech and all these other things, we don't break that out in our budget. It's just a line item to Kujilink for that dollar amount as a subgrantee. Is that helpful? Was that the question?
Yeah, it was helpful. Thank you.
Goodwell. Oh, you're speaking already. I was going to read your question, but you can ask it yourself, of course.
Yeah, for me, I was trying to find out. I'm Simon Pitromali from Pachedo, Uganda. And I wanted to, first of all, appreciate Margaret for all these efforts to bring us into this. But I wanted to find out how do you normally determine the level of effort contribution that you normally want us to put into the budget?
So
because I've always seen like where there's always several of those questions. How did you determine this? Is there anything signed and things like that?
Yeah. So you're talking about staff. So if I'm writing a grant budget and I say, I want $10,000 towards Dave Moss's salary for unfunded list, how did I get that $10,000, right? And I usually, you're right, I do a level of effort, a percentage. And it's a guess, honestly, until it happens, it's a guess. And traditionally, for organizations, I will tell them to, have their staff map out where they believe they will spend most of their time this year. So by percentage, if you have 4 programs, what is the percentage of time you anticipate spending on each of the programs during the year or during chunks of the year if they are cyclical? And then using that percentage. So for Dave, if I know, let's say he makes $20,000 a year and half of his time is usually spent on doing webinars and trainings. So I'm applying for a grant for money to do more webinars and trainings. I'll say we want 50% of Dave's time covered to manage these webinars and trainings, which is $10,000. Honestly, without actually doing timesheets and getting really detailed, it really is just your best estimate of where people spend their time. That's usually just the easiest way to do it. And most funders will take that, as long as you don't go over 100%. So I can't turn around and then ask for 100% of Dave's time on another grant if I know I have 50% covered here, because then I would have 150% covered, and that's more than I have budgeted. So I don't know if that's helpful at all.
It is helpful, though sometimes they, even after you get a grant, they sometimes ask where do you have any of this kind of somewhere written, either in the policy or somewhere like that, where those calculations are accepted or are supposed to be done from. Sometimes it happens that way, but I think you have responded.
Yeah, and sometimes if you get a grant that has those, they may ask you to actually track your time related to that. It depends on what the funder's looking for and how much documentation. It could be something as simple as, here's a spreadsheet of all of our staff and the percentage we allocate of their time to the various programs. Or, a more federal type grant in the US, for instance, might require that you have timesheets that say, in the last 2 weeks, I worked 20% of my time on this project and 20% here and 50% there.
Okay, we have one more question from Goodwell. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes.
Yeah, well,
come in.
Thank you for recognizing me. Of course, I've asked only on the question and answer box. In the first place, I want to really thank you for the session. It's really important and more timely. All the questions that are being asked here are for the rest of us. We have same questions or same gaps, and indeed the way you are responding to the questions is really helpful to all of us. So this is a timely session. I appreciate Kujalink for organizing this. I know even 60 minutes or so won't be enough, probably because this is dissecting the epicenter of a proposal, the critical center where we normally fail in proposal writings, this technical part of it all. The narrative part, we may have all the persuasive art of writing, but then when it comes to budgeting, I tell you, my colleagues, everywhere you are, this is where we flop. And we may write probably maybe 50 proposals in a year, but we find that there's not even a single proposal that has been granted. So this is the area that we have been assisted on. And I want to really ask you for another session because we can't exhaust every minute detail that is required in actually in the budgeting. We have heard about contingency on a budgeting. I don't know if that is a minimum standard that when we're budgeting, we have also to put the contingency. And if at all that's a standard requirement, what's the percentage of the total budget? That's the question that I've had. And again, something that you were dissecting earlier on the time, because I remember this other time we had a problem when we were budgeting for another donor. They say they retained the whole proposal. They said no. The time that you allocate to the executive director cannot be 100%. Therefore, we better pay more the project officer because they will have their 100% allotted to the project. So in other ways, the project officer was paid more than the executive director. And that raised a lot of confusion to the extent that even the executive director resigned. Say, no, there's no way my juniors would have been paid more than me. So you are bringing an issue which is very critical and probably at the right time because we have faced such challenges somewhere else. So you are helping us to ensure that we should never encounter such problems. But I know the challenge is the time that we have on this webinar. So may Kujalink consider another session so that we may preempt ourselves to ensure that we never have any challenges ahead of us regarding to budgeting. Thank you very much.
I will say it's true. There are so many things you can talk about with budgeting. I could talk about this for hours. I will not keep you here for hours. Dave knows I can just go off on all the aspects of financials and budgeting and grants. And it's my favorite thing to talk about. So I'm glad it was helpful. And yes, happy to do any more that Kujalink thinks would be helpful for folks.
Yes, thank you, and we will try to we will try to organize as many webinars we can, and some more on budget building will be happening. So we will let you know. Just for everyone else, if anyone would like to ask a question in Spanish or French, we have the interpreters with us still. So feel free to ask in the language that you prefer.
Yes, I want to come in.
Hakim, yes.
Interject in. Yes. Yeah, thank you. My name is Hakim, and I thank Margaret so much for presenting. I think it is my pleasure again to get more from her. I am in a refugee camp, of course, in Uganda. That is a Bidibidi refugee settlement. And I head in an organization called Girls Empowerment for Community Development. Of course, when we came in up to now, we are not, of course, funded.
Sorry, Hakim, you're cutting. Margaret, can you hear him properly, or is it okay?
When to get the funding?
Hakim,
But
we
my
are
question
losing
is,
you from time
most
to time.
and every single time we want in, okay, we get in a request for funding, maybe grant. They are yes.
Hakim, could you
Okay,
write down the
are you
question
people
on the
getting me
chat?
now? Hello? Are you
You're
people getting
cutting.
now?
Sorry, I think I lost you completely there for a minute.
Wait, can you write down the question on the chat? So maybe you can write down
Okay.
the question, and we can go to another question. You have some time to ask it on the chat, and we get back to you. Is that okay?
Okay, let me do like that.
Okay, Margaret, I would like to ask, are we only expected to fill the form or to write the proposal budget according to what the donor wants? Is it a must for it, or we can write that in our way, but which can convince the donor?
Sure. And unfortunately, the answer is it depends. So if the grant you're applying for has a template that they want you to use, so the two examples that I showed with the Russell Sage Foundation and then the other very simple budget template, those funders require that you use those templates. So even if your budget doesn't look like that, you have to use the budget templates that they give you. Then it's up to you to make sure that you explain using their template how you want to spend their money. But if they don't ask for a specific template, then you can use whatever version of the budget that you have. If they just say upload your organizational budget for the year, then you can upload whatever format of a budget that you have. You don't have to use anything specific. But unfortunately, if they do have a template that they require, you do have to use that template.
Thank you. Okay, I have a Goodwell's question. It was, I have heard about contingency in budgeting. What percentage should it be if it is a requirement?
I don't often see it as a requirement, but sometimes people will build it into their budget. And that, they might make their budget slightly larger than they need to be to account for potential increased costs or having to purchase other things. So if you think you might need, $1,000 for office supplies to carry out a program, I've seen people put in $1,500 for office supplies. That will kind of allow them to be a little bit more flexible in some areas. The thing to remember is you still have to justify why you put that number in there. So you still need to be able to explain why $1,500 for office supplies, even if it is because you want to be able to be flexible. The one thing that a lot of grants and a lot of budgets will allow is what they call an administrative or overhead percentage. And this is usually 10% or 20% of your total direct costs that you can include just as a percentage, right? You don't have to explain what you're going to do with it. It's just on top of your costs. And that's often what allows you to pay for some of the things that you need to just keep the organization running every day, right? So I have seen that it's usually 10 to 20% as an administrative cost at the end of the grant budget itself.
Thank you, Margaret. We don't have many more, don't have much time. So Veronica asks, says that it would be interesting to count with an example of a budget to have as a reference. So maybe, I don't know if you have one, Margaret, but if you do, you can send it to us. And when we share the video, we can also add a sample.
Sure. And I will always say that there are as many budget formats as there are people writing budgets. So make sure that whatever you are using, unless, again, you have a grant that has a template you have to use, that the budget template you're using, the format, whatever it is something that you will use, right? So they always say that the best budget is the budget that will be helpful for you. So if that is a slightly more detailed budget, then make it slightly more detailed. If it is just large buckets, then make it large buckets. The best one for your organization is the one that will allow you to understand where your money is going, what money you need to bring in, and forecast for the next year or 18 months. That's the one that you want. So I can give you templates, sure, but then make sure that you're making them work for you, right? That you're not just using the template because that's the one I gave you, that it's actually something that is useful for what program you're trying to run.
Thank you, Margaret. We need to start wrapping this. What level of detail do you need for a budget? That's a question from Adrian Watson. I'm guessing this can be a very diverse answer.
Yeah. Also,
depending on the project.
my favorite answer for like 90% of grant questions is it depends. The level of detail for you on your internal side is the one that's helpful. The level of detail for a funder, it might depend on how much space you have to explain it. At the bare minimum, just explain where the number came from, right? So, you know, if it is $1,000 in office supplies, just generally, what are you going to spend that money on? Is it laptops? Is it pencils and pens? You know, what are the things you want to buy with that $1,000? They might ask you to get super specific and say, one laptop at $300, 5 pencils at $1 each. Some funders want that, but at the bare minimum, just know in your head, if I'm given $1,000 to spend on this, here's what I would buy with it.
Thank you. Last one, when talking about travel expenses or goods transportation budget, what should we take in consideration?
So for travel, again, it kind of goes with everything. It's what do you need to make the work happen? In the US, I always use the government rates for travel for any place I go, because I know that a funder is going to understand where those numbers came from, and there's not going to be a debate about how much I'm budgeting for a hotel or for meals or what have you. Internationally, they also have those for international locations as well. So you can look up Dakar, and they will tell you the average rate for a hotel in Dakar during March, and the average meal rate in Dakar for March. So I like to use something standard that everyone can agree is a base for how much those things cost. But, you know, when you're thinking about travel, you know, I like to include all the pieces, whether, you know, it's how am I getting there? Do I need lodging? Is there insurance I need? Some places you have to pay for a visa to be able to get in, so making sure you include that. Meals and incidentals, you know, do I need cabs or Ubers when I get there? And then I usually build in a small amount for just, you know, if something happens, right? Travel miscellaneous, whether there's an emergency and I need to get home, or all of a sudden something costs more. So building in all of those pieces when you're thinking about travel. When you're thinking about travel.
Okay, thank you so much. People, we have to finish this session. Thank you so much, Margaret. People are very, very excited about budget, just so you know, and clearly this is something that everyone needs to dive in. So thank you everyone for your excitement and support and interest. We will be sending the recording of the webinar and also the slides. You can see that all the recordings from past webinars are uploaded into our platform in the video gallery, but still we are going to notify when this is available to watch. Margaret, thank you so much. Interpreters, thank you as well.